Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 2, Episode 5. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Steve, in your mind, what makes a great brand?
Such a great question. I think the brands that really separate themselves from the pack, that are remarkable, as I might say, are the ones that, first of all, are highly distinctive and unique. They're very customer relevant. But I think the big thing is that they make, in many cases, this really strong emotional connection or bond with the customer, which is, I think, when we talk to Emily, the reason why she uses the title for her book, I assume obsessed, is that, what is that passion or incredible bond and connection that brands make with consumers. And then the remarkable part, of course, is not only do they have that bond, but customers are so obsessed with the brand that they will talk about it with their friends and colleagues and workers, and that creates this amplification effect for brands that sustain them and propel them forward. So having said that, we're lucky to have with us on the episode today a very special guest, Emily Hayward, who is the co-founder and CEO of brand agency Red Antler and author of Obsessed, Building a Brand People Love from Day One.
Emily, welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am so good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's such a treat to be able to speak with you again. You and I spoke for the Voice of Retail podcast very briefly, and it just gave me a glimpse into what could be a great long discussion. And to have you and Steve on the same podcast together, I mean, really, I think it's the best of both worlds from my perspective. Such a great opportunity to talk about brand and strategy and retail. Let's jump in. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the work you do, and what is Red Antler, and let's start there.
Yeah, so I'm Emily Hayward. I am one of the founders of Red Antler. We're a brand company that's about 14 years old, and we specialize in startups and new ventures. So about half of our clients are pre-launch startups, which means that we're partnering directly with entrepreneurs to really help them bring their business idea to life through the lens of brand and really embed brand in their growth from the beginning. And when you started Red Antler, was that always the objective? I mean, did you have that in mind, that you were going to start in that space as opposed to, we're going to work with established brands and help them refurbish the brand? Was it always in your mind that there is some white space in the brand world where this need was just resonating with you and your partners? Yeah, actually, that white space is the reason we started Red Antler. So I had begun my career along with my co-founder working in traditional advertising. We were working with those big established brands. And as the startup scene was just taking off in New York, and we were seeing all the incredibly innovative ways that people were using emerging technology to bring more value to people's lives, to disrupt categories, we saw an opportunity to create the first creative services company that really was designed to work with startups. At the time, that was not the ethos. People really didn't think that startups should be investing in brand. We got a lot of pushback about whether our business model even made sense, including from people like our parents, who were very supportive, but wondered why we were choosing startups as our target audience. And I think a lot of people thought our end game was to get our start working with these little unknown companies and eventually work our way up to the big boys. But that was very much not the intention.
Well, I just want to spend one more minute on this. So when you say the approach is different, in what way was your approach different when you would go talk to startups and that kind of caliber of retail or whatever brands versus established brands? Like, what was unique about your approach that it was so tailored to that particular cohort or genre or whatever we want to call it?
I think there are a few factors at play that led us to create a differentiated offering. One is the mindset that founders bring to the table. A founder has a very different mindset about this work than even the most passionate brand manager at a corporate company, because a founder has left their whole life behind to start this business. So the people who we work with are very much not looking to outsource this. They have very strong opinions. They want to roll up their sleeves. They want to be at the table where the decisions are getting made. So that was one, is that we had to structure a very collaborative process. And it also meant that from the beginning, we needed to expand the definition of what we meant by brand. I think that when you work with an established company and the world has so much context already for that company, its products, what it stands for, you can come in and do a very narrow, focused effort for them. You can do a single campaign or a part of their website. For us, when we're working with these pre-launch companies, we are starting from literally zero. So we're having to create an entire world. It's more like writing a sci-fi novel. We have to invent all the characters, all the rules, every single way that this brand is going to show up when a consumer interacts with them, because that all contributes to somebody's impressions and feelings.
So maybe to pick up on that, and before we get a little bit deeper into some of your ideas, people talk a lot about brands, branding, lots of different concepts around that. Can you just give us what you mean by a brand and branding, and particularly why it's so important that you think about building a brand from day one?
Absolutely. I think the most common mistake that people make is they confuse the expressions of a brand with what it means to have a brand. So they'll say to me, oh, I don't need a brand. I've got my logo, or I've got my name in my logo. I just need a website. And I think that for us, our belief is that brand needs to start deeper than that. And what it really is an internal understanding of what your business stands for and why it should matter to people. It's almost answering the question of, why should people care about this thing? And that's what we call brand strategy. And then once you have that strategy or that idea of what you really want to be for people, what you want to own in the world, then that gets translated across everything that you do. So as we think about brand, yes, of course, logo, color palette, typography, those are all really valuable tools for helping people understand what you're all about and for giving an impression and a feeling. But we also mean digital experience. We also mean your social presence. Your customer service policy is part of your brand. Certainly the experience if you do sell a physical product, when that arrives in the home, opening it up, or obviously if you're, selling through physical retail, walking into your store, that is all brand, and it all ladders up to people's relationship with you.
And so how would you make the distinction? I mean, that makes sense to me. But how would you make the distinction between what people talk about as the customer experience versus the brand experience? Same thing or different?
I would say they're one and the same.
When I think about your book, Obsessed, fantastic book, by the way, congratulations on it's been on my night table many times, just as a great refresher. One of those top books that really is very insightful, but it's also it also provides a guide for a practical guide. You really dig into how to discover this underlying consumer need, and I've heard you speak of this before, that these passionate brand owners, these passionate folks who are starting, they come to you and they say, I've cracked a code, I'm doing the following things, and it's never been done before. Take me through how you and in the book provide that guide to say, really? Is it really? Are you really the next Beatles? Are you really the next Google? How do you unearth that and then strip it down and then start building back up a brand that is meaningful and has sustainability to it?
Well, I think the piece of the puzzle that it's easy for entrepreneurs to forget is that no matter how innovative your idea is, or actually maybe the more innovative your idea is, the more you need to make sure that you're connecting it to an existing human truth. And what I mean by that is I think that entrepreneurs rightfully get really excited about whatever it is that they're building, and sometimes forget that the news of it itself is not enough to get everyone else just as excited as they are. Most people, they're pretty ingrained in their habits. They're not necessarily looking to switch things up, other than our true early adopters, which is really a very small slice of the population. So the best businesses are the ones that say, hey, we've got this really new thing, but it's actually answering an age-old human truth. We just haven't figured out this particular solution yet. So rather than trying to create a new need, we're introducing a new way to solve something that was already there, that people were already feeling, wishing for it, whether or not they could articulate it. And, I can go deeper on that. I think that when I used to work in advertising, we used to joke around because we'd be writing these creative briefs that was the one pager that really set out to define what the campaign needed to do. And the worst briefs were the ones that would say, our consumer insight is that people wish there was a crunchy cereal with raisins. And it's like, no, they don't. You can't backfit your business idea into the consumer insight. You've got to start with what people are actually wishing for and struggling with, and then have that lead into your strategy, because that means that what you're building is going to actually be relevant.
In my book, I quote a quote that's been probably quoted by a million people at this point, which is Ted Levitt's comment about people don't buy a drill because they want a drill. They buy a drill because they want a hole. But I think it's even more than that, right? Like, you buy a drill because you want a hole, because you want perhaps your room to look better, or you want to have a more functioning, warm household, or like there's this higher order purpose or story you're trying to create. And I think that's part of what you get at in your book with this 5 why test. Could you just talk about that a little bit more? Because I think that maybe helps bring to life how you unlock that level of insight and ultimately what the brand is going to stand for.
Yes. So the why test is a fun little exercise that I invented to ensure that our team is consistently going deeper and not just landing on the self-serving problem, right? So let's use your example of the drill. So the self-serving problem, the people want a crunchy cereal with raisins version, would be something like, people want to drill holes in their wall. And it's like, okay, but why do they want to drill holes in their wall?
Right.
They look at their walls and they feel bare. Okay, well, why does that matter? Because, people want to create a home that reflects them. And okay, why does that matter? And my little joke is that you're only allowed to stop when you get to fear of death.
Yeah.
Our sense of our own mortality is what actually governs all the decisions we make as human beings if you go deep enough.
I think we're all getting there pretty quick these days.
Oh, yeah. Maybe I should stop using that for the time being.
No, well, actually, I love that, because I've talked about it, and others have talked about it kind of as this idea of, people don't buy products, they buy better versions of themselves. And I think at one level, that's true. But I think you make the point well in your book and elsewhere that, well, it's not just necessarily about, I want to look like I have the best taste, but there's this more primordial or motivation or something around self-preservation that ties back to it. So I think that's a great part of the book that you start out with.
And I think it doesn't even need to be interpreted as survival. I think it's more about, even why do people want to present the best versions of themselves? It's because we want to leave our mark in our short time on earth, So I don't think it has to be about like literally we're fending off the wolves and the cold. I think instead it's really about, what are those fundamental drivers that sit beneath our surface motivations?
Right. Well, can you tell I just had a birthday? Maybe I'm a little bit, more focused on the morbid side of it. Well, can we talk about some of the brands that you've worked with, or some of the ones you talk about in the book? One of the things I think that's interesting is some of these brands that are newer and gaining a lot of traction have really pretty narrow, pretty simple ideas behind them. Is that a coincidence, or does that say something about the consumer world we're in today, or where venture capital dollars flow, or like what's behind that?
I definitely don't think it's a coincidence. I think that a lot of these brands, particularly when we look at the direct to consumer, consumer goods brands that have launched over the past, let's say 6 years, have really had the benefit of being new and being able to launch with a very focused offering. And they all have plans to expand, which none of them are planning to be, single product brands forever. They would never be able to reach the scale that they're intending to reach. But by launching with, 1 or 2 styles, 1 or 2 products, what it enables them to do is tell a story that's less about product and more about an idea. So if you think about a brand like Away, which is not a client of mine, but I think they did a phenomenal job, when they first launched, they had 1 hard shell suitcase. And that meant that instead of getting you in the weeds about here's the differences between all our suitcases and here's how many inches they are, or centimeters, and how much can you fit in them, et cetera, they just told a story about travel, and the suitcase itself was iconic. You'd see it in the airport and you'd immediately recognize it because there was just one. Now, I know COVID's been tough on that business, but pre-COVID, they were up to selling a huge selection of travel-related items, including soft suitcases. So, I get pushback a lot from legacy brands or more established brands who will say, okay, that's fine. That's easy for these new companies. But what about me? I've got all these SKUs or features, whatever it might be. And my feeling is, what are the other ways that you can drive focus and create hierarchy and make tough choices and realize you do not need to tell the entire story the second someone arrives? Yeah. Because I think there's power in simplicity. And I think we all are suffering from information overload. And if the brand can do the work of curating for us, of making those tough choices for us, of editing themselves, which any writer knows is the hardest thing to do, that's ultimately a gift to your audience. You're not forcing them to weed through a bunch of different, similar SKUs or drop down items on a, navigation, and you're just leading them on a journey.
Mm-hmm. But don't you think, one of the things that's, I guess, a broader topic is, I think in many ways, a lot of these legacy retailers, and I've worked for a couple of very big ones, one of the challenge is this fear around letting go of what you already have, right? Letting go of that customer, letting go of those product lines, letting go of that advertising or those brick and mortar stores or whatever it might be that's going to allow you to get to this new area. So in some ways, I think these newer brands have a freedom to create and establish that beachhead and grow from there. Does that sound right, or is there a different way of thinking about that?
I think that's absolutely true. But I also think that for the established brands, it doesn't mean you have to get rid of your full product assortment. I think it's just about creating a layer of guidance and storytelling and taking advantage of technology to serve up what's most relevant to the person who's arriving versus just like throwing it all out there for everybody who appears.
Right. So can we just talk quickly about, one of the things I think is, and I've kind of made fun of this over the years, but so many of these digitally native vertical brands, DTC brands, were founded initially and funded in many cases initially around this idea that they wouldn't need stores, the software eats retail, Mark Andreessen thing. And then, of course, it's turned out that whether we're talking about Warby Parker or Bonobos or Everlane or just a huge Casper, et cetera, Allbirds, they're all opening stores, and in many cases, these stores are becoming an important part of their profitability and growth strategy. What's changed there, and how does thinking about branding across this digital physical convergence world, how does that play out in today's world?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because I think a lot of them did start with the story of we've cut out all the inefficiencies of physical retail. And then a year later, they're launching physical retail. So I think some of them, that was always the path, right? And it wasn't something that they came to the realization they needed to do. But in all cases, I think that you do reach a plateau of how much you can grow strictly through a digital channel. Whether that's about it gets more and more and more expensive to acquire new customers, whether that's about existing in a category in which there's a certain set of high value customers who still just really want to shop in person for whatever it is you're selling, or whether that's just about the fact that I think physical retail is still an incredible, immersive brand opportunity. I don't know about you, but I can't wait to go shopping again in person. It's really fun. And shopping online is great. And I do a lot of it. It doesn't scratch the same itch for me.
One of the chapters in your book, Making It Personal, talks about the connecting of the brand to the founder's story. And not dissimilar to what we've just been talking about, there's both upsides in authenticity, in being authentic, but is there a downside into risk around the overall brand taking on a cult of personality, so to speak, or becoming, the personality becomes bigger than the brand? How do you manage those two competing, or maybe they're complementary forces?
So I think if you mean risk in terms of the brand scaling beyond the founder, that's something that we can absolutely mitigate. I think that you never want the brand to just be about the founder, right? I think that the founder can provide a supporting role. There are places where the founder can be speaking that, like, maybe it's about the mission, that it sort of makes more sense to have it come from a human being than just from some generic brand copy. But if you mean risk in terms of scandal, I mean, yeah, that's real. And, I wrote my book for nice people to succeed. If your founder is planning to go do something terrible, I'm not really worried about your fate.
Do you think the brands you build, though, can transcend that? I mean, we've got, more examples than we'd probably care to mention of founders or executives that dance with the dark side in one way, shape, or another, and it comes to tarnish the brand, sometimes permanently, other times it's transitory. Do you see the brand? Let me ask the question differently. When you build this architecture, how closely do you weld it to the founders to allow that kind of give, so that it takes on a life of its own versus just it's just Steve Jobs' Apple or whatever, With
the brands that we've built, in the cases where it makes sense to have the founder be a public-facing part of the brand, we see it as one supporting pillar. It's never the story. And that's even true. We've built brands with actual celebrities. We launched a fragrance brand with Michelle Pfeiffer. We didn't name it Michelle Pfeiffer, and there's plenty of celebrities that have a fragrance that's just like their face, right? Mm-hmm. And with her, this was about a decades-long mission that she was on to put the first safe, fully transparent, fine fragrance into the world. So the story always had to be bigger than her. But at the same time, Michelle Pfeiffer is a beloved actor with an incredible platform. And it would have been really foolish not to, have her show up occasionally to talk about what she's doing. So I think it is always about balance and recognizing that it's just one tool in our toolkit, but we're not trying to build brands that are sort of celebrity vehicles or founder vehicles, where it's literally just about an individual.
Well, do you feel with I guess this has been around for a while, but with Instagram and then with TikTok, though, there's maybe more push to have the founder or the celebrity be the face of the brand or take more of a lead role in the building of a brand?
I think that you find that on those platforms, the content that tends to engage people most is of people. So that's where the founder, comes in handy because people love seeing the behind the scenes, hearing from actual people. It feels less like an ad. Mm-hmm. So again, I don't think you want your entire Instagram feed to just be the founder, but I think, or TikTok, but I do think that when you have a founder who embodies the values of the brand, who can be telling that story, it's an asset.
Let's shift gears a little bit. I think this last decade or so has just been amazing in terms of the number of new brands that have been created and captured customer imagination and gone from, almost nothing to pretty significant businesses. And your firm's been associated with quite a few of them. But one of the things that people push back on, including myself sometimes, is that, if you're able to raise a lot of venture capital money, which is not necessarily trivial, but you have investors that are willing to lose money for multiple years, being able to do these fantastic things around product design and branding and marketing and so forth, it's just a different way of doing business. So we have some of these brands, and one of your clients, Casper's a case in point, that certainly built a really sizable, fast-growing business, but has yet to make any money. We'll see. I think their earnings are out soon, and we'll see if that's changed. But what's your general take on that sort of criticism, not specifically about any of your clients, but just in general, that's cool, but when are these companies actually going to make money and prove that they're big, sustainable businesses?
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair question. And I do think there was a period of time in which consumer goods companies were raising at a valuation that was probably more appropriate to something like a software company, just in terms of the feasibility of actually growing and scaling that fast. And I think that has shifted. I think that we definitely had a couple years there where these companies were arguably raising too much money, and it forced them on a path that, and I'm not talking about any specific company, but just in general, looking at the landscape, where they had to make compromises, right? Because once you raise that amount, like you've got to justify that amount. Right. But I do think that the companies we're seeing that are most successful in that space are the ones that have true product differentiation and are able to create incredible loyalty. So, it's gotten more and more expensive to acquire new customers. Everybody's on the same platforms. Those prices have gone way up. You are going to have a very hard time reaching profitability if it's all about just bringing new people in. Mm-hmm. But certain companies that have like an incredible, distinct value prop have been able to drive, repeat purchases at a rate that is more like a software subscription. And I think those are the ones that are really pulling ahead of the pack and that we're going to see great success from.
I feel like we can't have a podcast episode these days without some sort of COVID-related question. So I'll put one to you. One thing that seems to have happened during the past, I guess, 9 months, almost a year now, is that some of these brands that were very online dominant were able to acquire more customers more quickly because of the shift away from physical, at least in some categories, to digital. And that's made their performance look better. And then, arguably, as we start to pull out, maybe those dynamics shift pretty profoundly. But is there any guidance you have about the way to think about building a brand or growing your brand in the middle of this COVID situation, but really starting to think about a path towards recovery, what might be different, what they need to be doing right now to position them for that recovery?
So I think the best things that brands can do during this time, especially to prepare for a very unknown future, is to double down on the value that they can bring to people's lives, regardless of external circumstances. Because, I think you could argue that, hey, everyone's gotten used to a level of convenience and so many businesses have moved online and like that's here to stay. I could just as easily argue, like, no way, we're all going to be so excited to be going down to our like local corner store when this is all over and mingling with the people, right? Same thing with fashion. It's like, oh, no one's ever going to wear, anything other than sweatpants again. Or you could say, no way, like people miss getting dressed up and we're about to enter some kind of, high glam resurgence, right? So Truthfully, no one knows. And I think that it would be a mistake to pivot too permanently beyond, getting through these next few months or year or whatever it is as best as you can. Because at the end of the day, whatever you're out there doing needs to be unique to you and the unique value that you bring. It should not be solely rooted in a moment.
Is there any thoughts that you have today about how you would approach building a brand that are today different than in the before time, in the pre-COVID time? Is trust bigger? Is trust more important? It's always been important. Is that more important? Is safety? Is security? Is reliability? Are you going to approach any different parts of the architecture differently coming out of the COVID era?
I mean, we have built a lot of brands now during COVID. And so, I'm already in it, right? And my feeling is that the rules have not changed. They've just been heightened. I think they've been brought into high definition in the sense that it was already hard to get people's focus and attention. You already needed to be thinking about how to really connect with people's values in a meaningful and true way, how to make sure that, whatever you were out there saying was like backed up by the reality of what you were delivering. And I think that's just even more true now. I think people do not have a lot of tolerance for BS at this moment. But I also think that people are eager and hungry to be like delighted and entertained. So I don't think everything's all doom and gloom. I don't think brands have to necessarily take a more like consistently somber approach. I mean, you want to be appropriate and not ignorant of everything that's happening around us. But I do think that what brands really need to be focusing on then and now and in the future is how they can give more than they're asking for. Every time you're interacting with someone, how are you adding more value to their life? How are you brightening their day? How are you giving them a useful piece of information? And not just think about, how do I get their email address or how do I get their credit card?
Well, Emily, this has been a fantastic conversation, and it was a real treat for me listening to the two of you discuss brand and brand strategy. So on behalf of Steve and the listeners, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. It was great to have the opportunity to talk with you today.
Thank you both. I so enjoyed the conversation.
All right, Steve, it's time for Remarkable or Forgettable. Let's kick it off with earnings season. So Macy's, Casper, Wayfair, Lowe's, and Home Depot, one at a time. Macy's earnings, but let's not talk about Macy's earnings. Let's talk about this statement that they said that A, their e-commerce went up 21%, and B, that their e-commerce is now more profitable than their stores. Remarkable? Forgettable?
Well, what's remarkable is that they had the gall to talk about those results in the context of their e-commerce growing slower than the industry, and this idea of trying to measure online profitability versus stores as if there's some totally separate thing. So I found it remarkable, but not in a good way. But overall, I think the results were pretty forgettable.
Let's talk about the other big home online retailer, Wayfair.
So I'm going to give a little bit of a mixed response here. So what's remarkable about Wayfair's results is they went from losing, I think, pretty close to $1 billion in 2019 to having, I think it's now 3 consecutive quarters of profitability. Now, part of the issue with Wayfair has been that they spent a lot of money on customer acquisition costs, and that's really prevented them from profitability. So they got this kind of double whammy of things shifting massively online. So that was great for volume and leveraging their fixed costs. And at the same time, they got a lot of growth without having to pay for it, basically. So kudos to them for really turning things around. That's a pretty dramatic change in such a short period of time. Still a little skeptical as to what this looks like further down the road. They did see some deceleration in growth, and they did see some average order values coming down. So maybe some storm clouds on the horizon there.
Well, and a pretty big tailwind behind them with the pandemic, right? Lots of people spending on their homes. So if you can't make a go of it now, you got to wonder what happens when that turns around. Speaking of which, Lowe's, Home Depot, the home improvement folks both released their results. What'd you think? Remarkable or forgettable?
Well, this is another one that I'm caveating a little bit. I mean, the results were pretty amazing. So from that standpoint, I'd say they were remarkable. But as we were just talking about, you've got all this investment or all the spending in people's homes. And I think both of them pretty much alluded to the fact that they expected some real slowdown as we start to get a little bit back to normal. And, some of this spending is kind of a one-time expense. You're doing projects or buying appliances or whatever. You're not going to buy those every quarter. Right. So I guess kind of to be expected. I will say one thing about Lowe's and Home Depot and some other folks, though. I mean, part of their ability to generate these results is they did a lot of the right things before the pandemic. They really did invest in digital. They invested in their harmonized shopping capabilities, and so they were well positioned to really crank out some good profits. But clearly, huge tailwind from some of the dynamics from the pandemic.
Well, let's talk about, we talked about department stores with Macy's. Let's talk about Kohl. So there's been activity with some investors trying to disrupt things and saying Kohl's isn't going in the right direction. What do you think? Remarkable, forgettable? Do you think they can turn themselves around?
Kohl's is another one of these brands that we've talked about a bunch of times that are really kind of stuck in the middle. And they've done some interesting things, but haven't really been able to move the dial very much at all. So I think this investor group, which I believe is the same group that forced some changes at Bed Bath & Beyond, they look like they really got, they're like a dog on a bone with this one and pushing Kohl's to take some more aggressive action. The companies push back to say they're doing a lot of things that the investor group is suggesting they do. So I think this is going to be remarkable, and it's probably a story that's going to be with us for a while. Kohl's overall business performance, though, continues to be, pretty meh.
Yeah, I think they got to watch out that they're not the dog that caught the car. In other words, let's get them to change it. Oh my God, we own these guys now. Let's talk about let's talk about Best Buy. So they're doing some restructuring of their physicality, their physical stores. Best Buy is such a great store. We're going to have Hubert Joly on, former CEO, in a couple of months with his new book. Remarkable or forgettable? What they're giving a try.
I think it's remarkable. I know we're going to talk about this in a future episode. What I think is interesting about the reconfiguring of their stores is that it's really this idea of physical stores taking on this new role as, the traditional role of a store, but also being a pickup center, being a service center, being a place to fulfill local delivery and e-commerce orders. So I think this is a trend that was slowly happening, but really picking up steam. And I think Best Buy is just kind of the lead dog here on these changes in terms of making stores more hybrid in nature.
All right, we're going to call this the canine issue, the canine episode. All dog references.
I saw your dog earlier, Michael, and so I've got dogs on my mind apparently.
All right, Apple is heading to Target. To me, it looked like a shop and shop. Nothing interesting going on, or not terribly remarkable. What was your impression?
Well, in and of itself, I think this is pretty incremental. So I would say forgettable. What I think is interesting, and I think we should take this on in a future episode, is just how various companies, whether it's the big guys like Apple and Nordstrom, and some of the smaller companies, are getting into these wholesale kind of partnerships or store within a store partnerships in a physical space. And so this changing nature of distribution, the role of stores, the getting closer to the customer, perhaps with more points of distribution. So I'm not sure what's exactly driving it with Apple. So in and of itself, I think it's, not terribly interesting, but I think it maybe speaks to a broader trend we should get into maybe in a future episode.
All right, last one. And I guess some stores are dead. Fry throws in the towel. And that's it. We're going to wrap it all up. Any final thoughts, I guess, on Fry?
Well, it's always sad to see any retailer have to close stores and the effect that has on vendors and their associates and so forth. To me, I often talk about, I talk about in my book and I talk about in my keynotes a lot of times, these retailers that basically watched the last 20 years happen to them. And Fry's was kind of, they're a regional player. So some folks probably know them well. Some folks are like, who the hell are these guys? But, they really didn't change very much in a long time. And this is, I think, just the result of it. But, here's a category, you got guys like Best Buy, which are doing fantastic, right? And here's a kind of small version of Best Buy that wakes up one morning and goes, you know what? We're done.
Right. Like that was the tone of the announcement. Is like, we've all got up this morning and realized there's no hope for us. So we're just going to wrap it up.
Yeah. I mean, I get that obviously the pandemic causes, these very unexpected, really huge waves. But this idea that just one morning you kind of wake up, particularly in a category that's doing pretty well, and you're like, we're just going to pack it in. It seems like there might have been a few things they could have done along the way.
Yeah. Well, anyway, remarkable in that sense, forgettable in another sense. Wrapping up another great episode, another great iteration of Remarkable or Forgettable. All right, well, that's a wrap. Another great interview and another great episode. Thanks again to Emily Hayward for being our special guest and discussing with us the brand and brand importance and her great new book, Obsessed. So look for that link in the show notes and on the shelves near you. Steve, take us home.
Well, if you liked what you heard, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, drop us that elusive 5-star rating, and tell a friend or two. I'm Steve Dennis. The expanded and completely revised second edition of my best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption, is out in April. Pre-order your copy now at Amazon, Indigo, bookshop.org, or just about anywhere books are sold.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast, and you can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co. Steve, have a safe week, and I'll talk to you again.